Hey guys, today we are going to learn about a brand new data type called strings. Now, if you've been watching the playlist so far, you'll know that we already learned about ints and floats, and both of these are used to store numbers. And numbers are very useful, but they certainly don't represent everything. Strings are going to give us the ability to represent any kind of text-based data. So what we mean by that is, imagine you want a program that can analyze a paper that somebody wrote, or even a book, or maybe just some notes that you've been taking. Strings give us the ability to do all of this. And if you want to be able to use strings to do some of these more complicated use cases, we first need to start with the basics. We need to go over how do we create strings and what are some of the operations we can do on strings once we have them created in Python. And that's what we're going to be getting into right now. To get started working with strings, we first need to know Python's syntax for strings. We saw last time that if you enter textual data in English to Python, you'll get back a syntax error. So we can look at a simple sentence as an example of this, just for a refresher. So let's take the sentence, I am learning Python. And as expected, we get back a syntax error. And this is because we're entering a sentence in English, but we're not doing anything to convey to Python that we want to store it as a string. So Python gets this English sentence and just doesn't really know what to do with it. Now, to tell Python that we do want to store this as a string, it's actually pretty simple. We take the text that we care about and we surround it in quotation marks. And you can see pretty immediately that Python does understand what we did here. The fact that this color changed to green and it became highlighted indicates that now we're working with some data that Python actually understands. So we can go ahead and press enter here and see that we're no longer getting a syntax error, and Python's actually mirroring back what we sent to it. Now, an interesting thing to point out here is that we entered the string in double quotation marks, but Python returned it in single quotation marks. And it turns out that it doesn't actually matter. So in Python, you can surround your strings in double quotation marks, you can surround them in single quotation marks. It's exactly the same. So let's take the word hello, and since I want to store it as a string, I am putting it in quotation marks. I can do it with double quotation marks, or I can do it with single quotation marks. It makes absolutely no difference. Now, there are some cases, however, where you might prefer to use double quotation marks or single quotation marks depending on your use case. So to look at an example of that, let's pretend we want to store the phrase, what's up? And I'm going to do it using single quotation marks at first. Okay, so you can see pretty immediately that there's a problem here. We have the first half highlighted in green, and the rest is in white with a green quotation mark at the end here. So the reason this is happening is because the phrase we're trying to store actually has a single quotation mark inside of it. So now when Python reads this, which it does from left to right, what's going to happen is it's going to see this symbol indicating that we are starting the string. And then it runs into a matching symbol, the end quotation mark, and assumes that the string is over. So this results in this section being stored as the string, and then everything afterward is kind of meaningless to Python because these symbols on their own don't make any sense. Remember, to us, we can tell that this is an S and this is the word up and this is a quotation, but to Python, it's just, it has a string and then there's some random characters. So this doesn't really make sense anymore. So if we try to enter this as is, we will get back a syntax error. And you might notice that the message here says unterminated string literal detected at line 1. Well, let's break this down. So detected at line 1 just means the line that we entered because we only entered one line of code. Unterminated string literal means that we started a string here, so Python saw the beginning of a string, but we never entered the matching end of the string. So that kind of begs the question, what would happen if we did this? We would still expect this to result in a syntax error because of this middle section here. Python still doesn't know what these symbols mean. So let's check. And now we get back probably what you were expecting the first time, that it's a syntax error and it's just a generic invalid syntax message. Same as when we tried to enter the English phrase up here. Now, since we can use double quotations or single quotations when we're storing our strings, there's a pretty easy workaround for this. So let's go back to the string that we're trying to store. And instead of storing everything in single quotations, we will use double. And probably like you were expecting, now it looks like it is actually storing the whole thing as a string. And a way to think about this is when you start a string in Python, it literally looks at every single next character and just waits until it sees the same character that you started the string with. That could be a single quote or it could be a double quote. In this case, since we started with a double quote, it checks all these characters, says, hey, that's not a double quote, must still be part of the string, and then eventually it gets to this double quote, indicating that it is the end of the string. So now if we enter this, we get back the string, what's up. Now let's take an example where we have two different strings. So let's say we have the string, what's up, and then somebody's name like Jim. Our goal is to combine these two into a single string. And it turns out that just like Python lets you use math operators for numeric types like addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, it also has operators that we can use on strings. Now, one of the built-in operators you can use on strings is the addition sign. When you use the addition sign on two strings, Python will combine the strings into a single larger string. So what I typed right here is asking Python to take the string what's up and then the string Jim and turn them into a single string. So it should say what's up Jim. And it does. So this is pretty neat. And the technical term for this is string concatenation, which really just means taking multiple strings and combining them into a single string. And you can do it with more than two strings also. So let's take what's up Jim and then add a question mark to the end to turn it into an actual phrase. And we get back what's up Jim. You might also notice here that I added this space before the word Jim. And that's because Python will take these strings very literally and just place them one next to the other. So if I got rid of this space, for example, let's try that. Now there's no space between what's up and Jim. And this is just a little bit confusing. It's going to be hard for people to read, which is why we did put the space the first time. Let's look at another example. Suppose we want to take someone's name and repeat it 3 times. And we can use my name as an example here. So one option would be to make a string and just type out Eric 3 times. Okay, and as expected, that does seem to work. Another option that we learned now is using string concatenation. And to do that, it would look a little bit like this. But both of these approaches have a problem. They involve me repeating myself. And generally, when we're programming, we want to have the computer do all of the repetitive work for us. And strings have a built-in way to solve this repetition problem. And in Python, it's using the multiplication symbol, which is called string repetition. So instead of typing out Eric 3 times, I can type my name once and then use string repetition to display it 3 times. So as you can see, the syntax for doing this is you put the string that you want to repeat on the left-hand side of the multiplication symbol, then the multiplication symbol itself, and then the number of times you want to repeat it. So if I send this to Python, it's going to give me back Eric 3 times. And the reason it has the space at the end is because we put a space at the end of Eric and then said repeat this 3 times. So the last repetition is Eric with a space at the end here. Now, since we're only repeating things 3 times here, this might not seem like a big deal. I mean, really, we probably could have just did it the first way and just typed things 3 times, right? But imagine we needed to repeat things a much larger number of times, like maybe it was 10, hundreds, or thousands, or even more. You definitely don't want to sit here typing my name out that many times. Instead, you can just use string repetition, like this, and change this number from 3 to 10, for example, or 10 to 100. And suddenly Python's just doing all of this work for us, instead of us sitting here and typing out Eric 100 times. Now, to give you a more real-world example of when you'd see this kind of thing, imagine you're signing into a website. You're probably used to seeing a screen that contains the fields I'm showing right up here. And the website remembers your login information, so it's going to pre-populate your email address like this, And then for your password, it's going to blur things out by putting a bunch of asterisks. Well, these asterisks are an example of a repetitive pattern here. And if you're not used to working with software, you may not often think about this, but when you do load a website on your computer, it executes some kind of logic in the background. Like if you think about it, there's something that told your computer to repeat these asterisks this many times. And all that something is code that someone wrote when this website was being created. And when that person wrote that code, they had a choice. They could have told the password field to populate like this a certain number of times, or they could have wrote something like this. Say it was 10 times or 15 times. And if the person knew what they were doing, I can pretty much guarantee that they did it this way. And there's really two main reasons for this. One, yeah, it saves a little bit of time, but in this case, maybe not so much because we're only showing it like 10, 15, maybe 20 times on the screen. But the more important one is when you write this, it's immediately obvious that we are showing an asterisk 15 times. Whereas this one, I don't know how many asterisks this is. I'd have to sit here and count it, which would waste time and is kind of error prone. I could pretty easily miss one of these asterisks as I'm going through. So this is just a much more clear and concise way to display asterisks multiple times. Now this was just a quick introduction to strings. There are more advanced concepts in strings that we'll get to in future videos, but the goal for right now is to understand what strings are, that they let us store text-based data, and to start experimenting around a little bit with some of the operations you can do with them. These things like string concatenation and string repetition. So that's going to wrap up our introduction to strings in Python. I hope you found this video helpful and you feel like you understand the basics of how to get started working with strings. Remember that programming is a very learn by doing type of skill. So please go through the examples we did on your own, actually type them out, tweak them, turn them into your own thing. That is the best way to learn coding. If you enjoyed the video, leave it a like, and if you want to see more from me in the future, subscribe to my channel as well. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.